Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Debate. The honourable member for Cowichan-Malahat-Langford.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and it's truly an honour to stand today on behalf of the hardworking residents of Cowichan-Malahat-Langford and give my turn at debate for Bill C-29 at report stage. And it is very unfortunate that I'm doing so under the yoke of time allocation. I truly feel that today's motion to limit members of Parliament and their ability to give viewpoints on behalf of their constituents was truly a reprehensible motion. The fact that the government brought down a guillotine to cut off our ability to speak on behalf of our constituents. Because, Mr. Speaker, when it comes to budget implementation acts, they are such vast pieces of legislation. They cover so many different areas that it truly, if any bill deserves close scrutiny, it's this type of legislation. We've had some odd occurrences in this debate. On Friday, one of the first motions that was moved by the government was a motion to delete the short title moved by the member for Winnipeg North. So I'm not sure why the committee decided not to do that, but then the government found the wisdom to do that. So there have been some strange occurrences in this bill. But I find that when members of Parliament move to that side of the chamber, Mr. Speaker, they tend to suffer from some short-term memory, because the Liberals used to be the most vocal opponents. They used to scream with moral outrage every time time allocation was invoked. And I think it's very helpful to go back to some actual quotes to help remind them. On February the 8th, 2012, the member for Winnipeg North said, and I quote, "The only way in which the government has been able to deal with the legislative agenda as opposed to working with the opposition is to ram it through the House of Commons in an undemocratic fashion. Why has the government been a total and absolute failure in not recognizing the importance of working in negotiation with the opposition and ensuring that Canada is served better through the normal process of debate?" I would love to ask that question to him today. I wonder what answer he would give. The 2012 version versus the 2016 version. Mr. Speaker, report stage is a particularly important time in the legislative process because it gives members of Parliament who were not able to participate at the committee stage the chance to move important amendments, and it's a very important stage of the bill. And the fact that we've only had Friday and now cutting it off today, I think shows an extreme disrespect. But that being said, I do want to move on to talk about some of the substantive measures of the bill and my views on it. You know, the Liberals ran strongly on extolling the virtues of their middle-class tax cut. And what I have to keep reminding my constituents, and indeed all Canadians, is that this is not a middle-class tax cut. You will not see the full benefits of this unless you're earning, in a six-figure income. And that certainly is not members of the middle class in my riding. And indeed in Canada, when the median income is $31,000 a year, those people are not receiving any benefit. Even, Mr. Speaker, if you had a decent income in the $60,000 to $70,000 range, your benefits would certainly not be as much as someone, say, earning $150,000, or even up to $199,000. So it's important to bring that, because the Liberals really like to sell this as a middle-class tax cut when, in fact, it is anything but. So there is that, Mr. Speaker, and I also want to, speak up on behalf of the hardworking small business owners in my riding of Cowichan-Malahat-Langford, because they really are fantastic people. Over the last 7 years, I've had a lot of opportunities to work with small businesses when they've had problems with their taxes, and I was given the very privileged position in my former life as a constituency assistant to really see the details of small business tax returns, and I know how difficult it is for them to survive in today's environment. Often, small business owners are paying themselves very meager salaries, and they're really cutting corners for themselves personally to ensure that their employees have jobs and that the business continues to be a source of employment for the local community, and that's indeed a pattern that we see across Canada. So it's quite disappointing to see that the Liberals didn't move ahead with their promised small business tax cut, but also I think there was a very real opportunity in this Budget Implementation Act to take some meaningful action on credit card fees, because credit card fees can be an enormous expense for businesses. If you don't have the machines that take credit cards, you are not going to get customers. But credit cards charge huge fees for using that service. And I think there was a missed opportunity to take some meaningful action on that measure. And it would have done some great work for businesses across this country. Next thing I want to talk about, Mr. Speaker, is the child benefit, because the child benefit, another very extolled program by the Liberals, and I'll agree. Like, I think with families, anytime we're providing them with money, it's a good thing, because I know very well that families struggle a lot. But we don't want to overextend ourselves in praising this, because if you look at the situation that many families are going through with the lack of childcare spaces, and more importantly, the lack of affordable childcare spaces, we look at the maximum child benefit, and it's around the range of $6,400. That's only going to meet you halfway when you're looking for childcare spaces and how expensive they are. And furthermore, if there are no good full-paying or full-time jobs out there with a standard living wage, you're going to have a situation where a lot of families, a lot of parents, can't even afford to get that second job, because the childcare costs completely outweigh what they would make in terms of income. So there's no ability for upward mobility, right? That's the main thing. It's been proven time and time again. If you provide decent, affordable childcare, you allow families to make their way up. And furthermore, if you provide them with that strong, safe minimum wage, that's another added benefit. I am disappointed that with the child benefit, however, that families are going to have to wait until the year 2020 until it gets indexed to inflation. That leaves a big question mark for me, Mr. Speaker. Why is the Liberal government not taking action by implementing this indexation next year? I haven't received an adequate answer on that very simple question yet, and I will be reminding my constituents of that point time and time again. And then, of course, the next part that I want to talk about, Mr. Speaker, goes to the infrastructure bank proposal. You know, we first heard about this in Budget 2016 earlier in the spring when it started talking about asset recycling. Now, I'm always very wary when these new terms, this new technical jargon comes up, because it usually takes you know, something and tries to sort of you know, change the meaning so people get a little bit confused about what's really going on. You know, Andrew Coyne had this to say in one of his columns earlier this year. He stated that asset recycling can finance capital projects like roads and bridges by charging the people who use them. Once these would have been known as fees and road tolls, but in the language of today's technocrats, it's called asset monetization or asset recycling. Now, when we have private investors making these substantial investments in infrastructure projects, we know they're going to want a rate of return. And it has been quoted by Michael Sabia when he appeared before the Toronto Board of Trade on March 3rd, 2016, that he was looking for stable, predictable returns in the 7 to 9% range. Now, that's not something that Canadians were acquainted with during the Liberal campaign promise. And 7 to 9% rates of return, you have to look at the tolls and the user fees that would have to be charged to consumers, to ordinary Canadians and residents. And that goes way above and beyond the kind of you know, interest rates I think Canadians were hoping for when the federal government can use its borrowing power at extremely low interest rates to finance these kind of capital projects. That's a far cry from the 7 to 9% that private investors are going to be looking for. So those are some of the major concerns. I think overall, Mr. Speaker or Madam Speaker, there were some incredible missed opportunities in this bill. We in the New Democratic Party have been raising this consistently. We've seen some real opportunities that could have been made use of to really help the lower income members of our society, moving forward with a federal minimum wage, showing some leadership, providing those childcare spaces, making sure that we actually use the federal government's borrowing power to make those much needed investments in infrastructure rather than relying on the private sector and the tolls and user fees they are going to extract. We are also hoping to see the child benefit would be indexed to inflation starting next year. But I'll leave it at that, Madam Speaker, because I think I've made my points, and I certainly welcome any questions from honourable members. And again, I appreciate this opportunity to speak on behalf of the amazing constituents of Cowichan-Malahat-Langford. Thank you.
Questions and comments, questions et commentaires. L'honorable député de Mont-Royal.
The honourable member for Mont-Royal.
Honourable colleague for his, as usual, very eloquent speech. I wanted to ask him about a question that was asked previously by his colleague related to the consumer protection aspects of C-29. Does the member not agree that having a national framework for consumer protection rules and regulations related to the banking industry is an actual step forward for his constituents in British Columbia?
Honourable member for Cowichan-Malahat-Langford.
Well, Madam Speaker, I think in the course of debate on Bill C-29 and even in its previous predecessor, the previous Budget Implementation Act, there are measures in this budget that we can support, and I think whenever we're looking out for consumers and making sure that they're being protected against nefarious business practices, absolutely we can get behind measures like that. But for the reasons I outlined earlier, because it's such a wide ranging bill and there's so many areas that we believe could have been improved, that's the stated reason why, because we have to pass this bill in its present form with all of the measures. That's why we will have to be voting against it.
Questions and comments, questions et commentaires. The honourable member for Edmonton Riverbend.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and thank the member for his speech. Curious, he neglected to talk about two things that we talk about on this side of the House. Carbon taxes, which I think I'm counting about 26 days now, we'll see it in Alberta and the impact that that'll have. But also curious on his thoughts on the pipeline approval that was just announced. I know his area in BC is probably has some opinions on that, and curious what he would think, because I know back home in my province the provincial premier seems to be talking that it was her who did a lot of it. So I'm curious as what my honourable member would think.
The honourable member for Cowichan-Malahat-Langford.
Well, Madam Speaker, I think when we talk about a carbon tax or indeed any kind of a price on pollution, I think if we look at the realities of today and going on in the 21st century, almost everyone I know of agrees that a price on carbon has to be instituted if we're going to change our behavior. And with respect to pipelines in British Columbia, absolutely, I will echo my constituents' extreme disappointment. It's not only just because the pipeline is being built, it's because the Liberal government completely betrayed British Columbians when they made a promise to institute a new environmental review process. We've always sought after value-added products. Shipping raw diluted bitumen, we're not getting any value out of that product. And I would love to see some refining capacity expanded in Alberta so that we can sell a value-added product and use that to fund our transition to a renewable energy future. I think that's where the future is. I owe that to my children, and I think we all owe that to the next generation.
Questions and comments, questions et commentaires. L'honorable, the Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Government House Leader.
Yes, thank you, Madam Speaker. And I'm wondering if the member can just reflect on why it is that the NDP have not recognized, they talk a lot about the middle class, but they don't necessarily do it in a positive way. We look at the middle class, and the vast majority of the middle class that are working hard and deserve the tax break, yet the NDP are voting against the tax break, ultimately saying it's not helping the poor. Yet we're helping the poorest of our seniors, the poorest families in terms of children through wonderful enhancements, the Canada Child Benefit and the GIS. And I'm wondering why it is that the NDP don't recognize the other benefits. They just focus on the middle-class tax cuts, the healthcare workers, factory floor worker. Those are the bulk that are getting the advantage of the tax break. They're voting against that. But they're also excluding the benefits for the families with young children and their seniors that are most vulnerable. Why is that?
Bref réponse. A brief answer from the member for Cowichan-Malahat-Langford.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I think I did actually point out that, the child benefit is going to have some benefits, and as the NDP's critic for seniors issues, I did welcome an increase in the GIS. But I also just wanted to point out to the member for Winnipeg North that I also was very pointed in my criticisms of the Liberal tax cut, because it's only going to benefit people the most who have six-figure incomes. For the median income in Canada, $31,000 a year, they're not going to see any benefits. And again, I'll reiterate, what Canadian families need, especially low-income ones, is they need affordable childcare spaces to be built, because that is the true cost to Canadian families, and the child benefit, unfortunately, does not allay that gigantic cost to Canadian families.